You know, there's a lot to be said about, climbing into the ring and knowing that you might already lose. There's a kind of nobility there when you understand that you're punching up, that you're pushing against something that is established, and trying to create something that is a bit fringe or maybe out of the norm. And that's kind of how I feel about this guitar. It's punching up. The second it hit the showroom floor some 35 years ago, everybody was always willing to push against it. We didn't have the globalized economy at the time. And even now, although there is obviously preference on where certain products are made, we're much more open-minded in the sense that we understand that really when it shakes out, it's just humans over there versus humans over here. But this thing, when it hit the showroom, was definitely two things. Number one, it was unfairly compared to its Gibson counterpart. Because when you're the first to the table, you get to, have carte blanche. And number two, it was probably one of the best built guitars in the shop. This guitar does not sit there and try to walk a fine line. It doesn't do what some of the more entry-level model Epiphones are doing right now, where they're kind of, replicating a design. This thing took it and kind of pushed it in a funny direction. It knew it was never going to be, judged fairly. You got to remember during the 1980s and stuff like that, there was still this prevailing mentality of cork sniffing. If it wasn't made in the USA and it didn't say Gibson or Fender on it, then it wasn't worth playing. And I even had music teachers who used to tell me to, get rid of a guitar because it wasn't quote-unquote real. To them, which I always replied, does it have strings? I don't care if it's a real Gibson. I care if it's a real guitar. I love guitars. I don't just like one type of guitar. But I did have teachers who even back then used to do stuff like that. That was kind of just the prevailing culture. Glad to see it going. Glad to see that, receding. But when you stand back and you look at this thing, the inlays, everything, all the little discrepancies which once counted against it because they were not Gibson-esque, are now the things that make this guitar spectacular. So a friend of mine handed this off to me and asked me to go through it, give it a quick cleanup, stuff like that. And you can see his personality prevalent in the guitar. He's a thinker's player. He's always been a thinker's player. And when you hear him play, it might not be, Ingrid Malmsteen or anything like that, thank God, but it is fantastic playing, and this is definitely the guitar of a thinker. So anyway, let's go ahead and give this thing a quick cleanup, kind of go through it, maybe get some tones out of it, stuff like that. But I wanted to put this one on the channel because it's punching up, and it's been punching up from birth. And there's a great nobility in that. When a product is obviously going to be slighted, despite the fact that from a design standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, from a musician standpoint, that this is a beautiful instrument. And only now is it really starting to get the credit that it's due. So I guess we should just be thankful for that. Anyway, let's go ahead and see what this thing sounds like. Take a moment to go over some details on this and take a little bit of a closer look. Now that the strings are off and I'm kind of in cleaning mode and I've got my brain on it, I'm seeing all these little details that just once again show you that this isn't a 335, but then in a lot of ways they really were pulling all the stops and going to town. It probably hurt sales, and it probably cost more to make this thing than it did to sell it. The bridge, for instance, it's a standard ABR1 style bridge, but when you look closely at the bridge, what you notice is is that there's a much more significant radius over the entire housing of the bridge. It's not flat to the top with the saddles being raised or lowered comparatively. You've got saddles that are uniform, and the entirety of the bridge has the radius to it. I like this because it creates a less protrusive saddle. In my earlier years, if you guys follow the Instagram account, you might have already seen this little blip about that. But in the earlier years when I used to play shows, I was much more aggressive as a strummer. You know, not like a punk guy or nothing like that, but, you know, I moved around a lot on stage, and I'd cut my hand all the time. So having a bridge in which they've thought about that is nice. Then they take the saddles and they round off the top of the saddle. So from the factory, the shoulders of the saddles have been knocked smooth, and progressively the saddles closer to the low E are more and more subdued. They have relief channels on the back of the actual saddle recesses, so that if you oil them, the oil doesn't become stuck in there, which is pretty cool. The tailpiece, this is really great. First off, it's a really nice tailpiece. The weight on it is good. The alloy feels nice. The plating is broken away in such a way that it only gets better and better with age. But the thing is that this tailpiece is just a much better design than a stop tail. Stop tails were kind of weird in the effect that Gibson used them as bridges for quite a long while, and then just eventually cycled them into a tailpiece. Obviously, you can't do that. You can't do the under wrap and over. But at the same time, these relief channels are fantastic, because just as I was changing the strings, there was a part of me that says, okay, go ahead and straighten the end up so that it doesn't kink or cinch down when I try to yank it out of the bridge. And instead, you got these relief channels. So once you pop the thing back, like, you know, 1/4 of an inch, it just jumps right out of the top of the tailpiece. That's a cool design. Another thing about this that's really cool that you might not pick up on if you were, you know, just kind of taking a snap look at it, is that Ibanez added a 3rd pickup height screw on each of the humbuckers. Now, like I said, you might not even see it if you were just taking a quick look. But any of you SG guys, you know that that is huge, because it actually enables you to tilt the pickup. It gives you a triangulation of the structure so that you can control its kind of teeter. Now, on Gibsons, a ton of times I've had to use foam or you know, something to brace one side of the pickup, because SGs have a tendency of having the pickup kind of tilting away or tilting backward, and all of a sudden one side of the bobbin is very close to the strings and the other side is not close enough. So I love that they added that in there. It's just another way that you see that this particular instrument was just over-engineered to a degree in which it's quite admirable, actually. From a business perspective, I'm sure that they probably lost a lot more on this guitar, having it go out, you know, with the building quality and everything like that. But who cares? It's here now, and I get to play it, and I get to, you know, look at it and work on it and stuff like that. So I'm not really too worried about what they put into it. It's fairly obvious from minute one that they put a lot into it. And the inlays. You could have just gave us box inlays. You could have just gave us traps. You could have just gave us dots. But instead, you gave us blocks that are made up of different inlays. So you have a mother of pearl that is, you know, standard block, and then they've cut into the block and did these really fantastic ornate abalone inlays. Really good stuff. And even after 20, 30 years, the leveling on all of them is still really good, and they're all still seated nice. There's almost no lines around the outside, so when they drop these in, you had a minimal fill. I've seen some stuff, you know, where you get it and you know, it's not quite uniform. The box maybe slid a little bit, and then they dropped down that glue and just, you know, planed over the top of it to get it flush. But that's really cool too. Like I was saying before, no fret nibs on this, but that's okay. That's kind of a come or go. And I've seen plenty of guitars from Japan that didn't have fret nibs, and the work around the binding was just so nice that you couldn't help it. But this was something that I just had to talk about, because I was like, holy crap, this is an awesome idea. How has nobody done this? Why has nobody done this? Because for years and years and years, as I got into a guitar and then jumped into something else, finally eventually ending up with John Monroe, which is a guitar that I wouldn't say that I'd be buried with because it'd be a terrible shame for the guitar, but it's definitely gonna, when I die, it's gonna go to a family member. Let's just put it that way. But with all my jumping around with guitars and everything like that, this was the coolest thing. The tuners have two different methods in which you can use them. They have the drop down like you would have on a split post Fender. And then they have the through design, which you would have on a lot of more contemporary guitars. They put both of them on there. So you could string it either way. You could have all of your coiled strings going through the conventionality. You could have all your higher strings going through the drop-in. And this is really, really great because I cannot tell you, as a person who takes apart guitars constantly, how much it sucks when you're using strings and they've maybe been on there for 2 or 3 days, but you got to fix something because you got a show tomorrow, or you got a session coming up this weekend, and you just roasted the strings because you know as soon as they cinch them back down, they're not going to fold the same way, and now you've created a stress fold in the string, and you're going to find out where during the show. It's just another one of those examples where it's not above and beyond. It's them building in a new standard for practicality and usability. Because no matter how fancy or how basic a guitar looks, if it drives you nuts at every show and it gives you trouble at every session, it's not going to get used, and it doesn't matter how good it is or how perfect it is. You know, with this guitar, they just rang all the bells, pulled all the stops, did this really fantastic, you know, 2-color burst, which extends around to the sides. You know, you've got double binding all over this thing. And the binding's really hanging in there. You know, some of the Matsumoku stuff you get from the 1960s and 70s, they're beautiful and they're enigmatic and they're strange and they're quirky. But, you know, the binding is always a bit touch and go and the frets are lifting or something like that. Not putting them down, just saying that at this point, Japan had gotten so far that they had sailed way past what we were doing here in the States and were thinking outside the box in such a profoundly, you know, fantastic way that it wasn't enough to have a nut that was bone on there. It had to have a strip of brass, which is just super cool. Anyway, should probably go ahead and put this thing back together. Thought you guys and gals might appreciate you know, that little detail there. It's the type of thing that maybe we all would look right over, but it is something that I can appreciate. Also, you got coil splitting on this thing. I don't know if this is factory. It doesn't look like it is. It looks like somebody had gotten to this maybe 10, 15 years ago and pumped a couple more bucks into it just to open up some of its variability. But, I mean, it's just, the thing is rad. It's like $2,000 worth of ES335, and you're not paying $2,000 for an Artist Series Ibanez. You're not even paying for $2,000 worth of ES335. You're paying for $3,000 because some of the ESs that you see at Guitar Center now, you play them and you're like, I didn't think I could not like playing this, you know. So it really is just a bargain. I mean, we've had tons of guitars come through on the channel, and you know, they've all got something to offer. You know, there's always something you could use them for. Even the worst ones. You know, you listen to Beck records, like, you know, for instance, like Devil's Haircut or something like that, you know, or Gamma Ray. And what you realize is that Beck loves using cheap, messed up, poorly maintained guitars. He has a very intentional tonality on those records. But the thing is that as good as those were, they did have limitations as far as practicality, being able to use them live, being able to depend on them. This, no limitations.